Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today we'll be discussing directed acyclic graphs. So if you don't know what these are, that's okay. I'll start with explaining the very basics and then we'll go up from there. So by the end of the video, inshallah, you'll know everything about DAGs and how to use them. And hopefully you'll be an expert by the end. Okay, so let's start with you wanting to explore the association or like the causation between a specific variable or an exposure and an outcome. So you want to ask, does variable A lead to variable B? However, there's a lot of other variables that are connected to both the exposure or the outcome or both of them. So you need to figure out like what variables do I need to control for or adjust for so that I can eliminate any bias, So this is where DAGs come in useful. So first I'll start with some basics from year one, so that it'll help you, it'll help build on to how to make a DAG, okay? So first let's start with understanding what a confounder is. So this is an example, like a classic example of a confounder. So let's say you're assessing the association between ice cream sales and drowning. So some people might say that the higher the ice cream sales, the more the cases of drowning, and so ice cream sales lead to drowning. However, if we think about it, the weather is a confounder, or the temperature, because the warmer it is, the more people are likely to go to the beach, and therefore the more they are likely to buy ice cream, and at the same time the more they're if there's more people at the beach, there's probably more people who are going to drown. So that's why weather is a confounder in this association. And so if you adjust for it, meaning you separate the warmer days from the colder days, you'll realize that actually when it's warmer, you notice that there are high ice cream sales, and at the same time there's a high drowning incidence. And so you realize, okay, this is a confounder. So when you adjust for it, this association or this causation becomes zero. So this is an example of a confounder. Now we're going to look at a collider. So on the other hand, a collider is when both the exposure and the outcome lead to this common variable. So for example, someone might say people who have insurance are more likely to get cancer, or insurance leads to cancer. But if you think about it, insurance, like if someone has insurance, they're more likely to go to the hospital because they have access to it. And at the same time, if someone has cancer, they're more likely to be in the hospital. They're more likely to be hospitalized. They need to go to the hospital for medication and appointments and things like that. And so if you adjust for this, then you'll erroneously find an association between this, because you'll say, oh, so people in the hospital, obviously they're more likely to have insurance, and that's why they're able to come into the hospital. And at the same time, if they're in the hospital, they're more likely to be sick patients, So if you adjust for this, it's actually wrong. And it says this in the DAG. And that's why DAGity is so useful, because it automatically tells you whether you should be adjusting for this or not. So if you actually don't adjust for the collider, that's doing the right thing. And so that's why some people, or like in certain studies, they adjust for every variable that's possibly connected to either the exposure or the outcome, but they don't realize that some of these variables might be colliders, and so if they adjust for them, they actually introduce bias. So that's why creating a DAG and having this sort of proper connection between the exposure and outcome and the covariates helps with eliminating as much confounding or clouding bias as possible. So now I'll teach you how to make your own DAG. And I'll use an example or like a study that I did recently and how we made a DAG in our group, okay? So first of all, the study is about, so the exposure is prenatal tobacco exposure. So we wanted to ask, like, during pregnancy, if the mother is exposed to smoke, either primary smoking or secondary smoking, does that increase the chance of neurodevelopmental delay in the child? So that was the outcome, okay? So this was our question. Does environmental tobacco smoke, prenatal environmental tobacco smoke, lead to neurodevelopmental delay? This was our question. So then what you need to do as a group, you need to all go and do your own literature search, and you need to find as many variables that are connected to both, to either the exposure or the outcome or both, and like come prepared. So go ask experts, search on PubMed, ask your mentors, like ask anyone, you know. And then like everyone in the group needs to come together and basically mind map, or like basically like brainstorm all the variables that they came up with, okay? So these were some of the variables that we came up with. And then you need to sit together as a group and think, okay, for example, socioeconomic status. What does that lead to? That leads to increased tobacco smoke. That leads to worsened maternal nutrition, things like that. So basically, you need to connect all of these variables to the exposure or the outcome and each other as well. Okay? So once you do that, it might look like this. And so it tells you, DAGity tells you that there are some biasing paths that are open, okay? And then it gives you the variables that you need to adjust for, okay? So for example, this one, these are the two options, okay? So first of all, it's age, nutrition, prenatal alcohol exposure, distress, BMI, like all of these 5 things. You can adjust for all these 5, or you can adjust for just 3 of these, which is the prenatal alcohol, maternal age, and socioeconomic status. Okay, so these 3. Now, why do they give you multiple options? Because sometimes in your data, you don't have as much data on certain variables. So for example, they gave us this option. But for example, if I did not have information about socioeconomic status in my study, then I had information on all of these other variables, then I could choose this option and adjust for all of these things because I don't have information on this. But luckily we had information on these, okay? Now some people might ask, okay, why don't you just adjust for everything? Like none of these are colliders, you know? Like if you adjust for all of these things, by the way, when I adjust, I just type A on my keyboard and it automatically adjusts, but you can also adjust from this button. So if you click on a specific variable and you click adjust, it turns white, which means that you adjusted it, okay? So see, I adjusted for all of these things and it's correctly adjusted, but it's more convenient to adjust for as few as possible because certain databases, they don't have data on for like everyone for every variable, you know? Like certain individuals, they'll have data on, let's say 5 of these, but they might not have data on alcohol, for example. And so you would lose patients, or I mean you would lose participants if you adjust for everything. So that's why it's sometimes better to just adjust for the fewest number of variables, okay? And so that's what we did. We only adjusted for these 3, and then it was correctly adjusted. So khalas, we didn't need to adjust for the rest of them, okay? And so this is how we had this is how we eliminated confounding bias. Not completely eliminated because there are still some unknown confounders that we just didn't know about, and so that's called like residual confounding bias. But that's like something that you can't eliminate. Like it's just how it is. Now, in randomized controlled trials, you don't have to do any of this because those patients are randomized to each group. And so, like when you randomize, all of the variables, they also like randomly get distributed into both groups. So, for example, like tobacco smoke here is the exposure. People who are like in the exposed, so exposed to tobacco, are more likely to have lower income or to have like lower socioeconomic status. And so yeah, you need to adjust for that. But if you randomize people into either tobacco exposed or unexposed, then it's random. And so like an equal, or like an estimate of an equal number, like approximately an equal number of poor and rich people will be in both groups because you randomize them anyway, you know. Okay, now there are certain things. Okay, yeah, so one important thing, when we first started, it was not socioeconomic status. It was, we actually had it split. We had the income and education. So the thing with that is, like income and education, they're very highly correlated. So we saw in our data that that people who had high income also had high education. So we didn't need to adjust for both of them. So that's why we just combined income and education together and we called it socioeconomic status, and we just adjusted like just income, and that automatically kind of adjusted for education because they're aslan both like highly correlated. So that's one thing I also wanted to mention. Oh yeah, so the nice thing about, like another nice thing about this website is that you have model code. Okay, so basically you can create your own DAG, and then if you want to share it with someone, you don't have to like screenshot it. You just send them this model code, okay, and then they can paste it into their own browser and they can edit it, you know, without having to create it all over again based on your screenshot, you know. So that's like a nice feature that they have. Okay, and then last thing, we're going to talk about what happens if you introduce a collider. So this is an example, like for example, pregnancy complications, okay? So when I included pregnancy complications as a possible variable, and I connected all of the possible variables with the exposure and the outcome, if you adjust for this, it'll tell you incorrectly adjusted. Why? Because this is a collider. So that's a nice thing about DAGity. It will tell you, it'll warn you about collider bias. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And if there's anything that you want me to talk about, just let me know in the comments, or if you know me in person, you can just tell me in person. And yeah, thank you so much and have a good day.